Dr. Rajeswari Rajagopalan, Distinguished Fellow and Head of the Nuclear and Space Policy Initiative at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi, explains what major changes we're likely to see in India's security and foreign policy and how a changing Sino-India relationship may influence India's relations with Quad and Quad Plus countries. Dr. Rajeswari Rajagopalan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Look, you wrote recently that the killing of 20 Indian Army men at the Galvan River confrontation a month ago is a game changer in India's national security and foreign policy strategy. Can you tell us why this is and what major changes we're likely to see in India's security and foreign policy?
Sure, thank you, Mike. And I would say that for close to about 5 decades, India and China, both countries, took pride in the fact that there had been no fatalities, not even casualties on the line of actual control. And there was a certain amount of security, predictability, and sort of a peace and tranquility that existed despite occasional flare-ups. Even during Doklam, which was the major conflict, as a 72-day conflict between India and China in 2017, did not result in any casualty. And I think that changed with this violent clash in which there was the 20 army men killed, including the commanding officer of the battalion. So that, I would say, it clearly changes the dynamics between India and China for the worse. And I cannot think that it will be business as usual after the Galvan clash in a sense. Therefore, it would call for India to relook at its foreign policy, national security strategy. It cannot continue with its ambivalent and somewhat uncommitted the hedging approach that India has had for a very long time.
India has retaliated against China in economic terms. What's at stake for both nations?
Of course, I think there is going to be economic cost for both countries, but I think India is going to be hurt more than China. Given the scale and proportion of their trade and investment, I think India is certainly going to be more vulnerable because India figures pretty small in China's overall trade and investment, and therefore it may not impact China as much as it would in the case of India. India could be impacted harder, but New Delhi, I believe it has to bite the bullet, suffer the economic costs, because I think in the longer term, the benefits of it doing so far outweigh the short-term pains that it may have to go through. But India's actions, on the other hand, for instance, like banning the certain 59 apps, for instance, Chinese apps like TikTok, WeChat, I think that would have broader repercussions for China. China, I would say, has lost India strategically for some very short-term tactical gains that they were planning to make. But I think they have lost India for generations now.
What about Huawei? Will they be blocked in the Indian market? It's very important for Huawei to be in the Indian market because of the knockbacks from the US and other countries around the world.
Absolutely. And I think India is yet to make a decision on the 5G question. But in all likelihood, the Huawei is going to be blocked. Even prior to the Galvan clash, there were apprehensions in Indian policy conversations about how and why, if we should go with the Huawei at all. But I think after the Galvan clash, I think it's almost becomes very clear that Huawei is not going to be entertained. None of the Chinese firms are going to be part of the Huawei. And if you look at the number of actions that India has taken since the Galvan clash, several of the infrastructure projects, for instance, that were actually granted to Chinese companies already, these have been either revoked or cancelled. So the Indian anger towards China and coming to a critical sector like the 5G, I think entertaining Chinese companies is a disaster. And in all likelihood, like I said, I think Huawei is going to be blocked.
How will India be then impacted by retaliation from China?
Of course, China is not going to be keeping quiet about it. For instance, one sector that I can immediately think of, which is going to be impacted pretty much, is the Indian pharmaceutical industry. Because it's going to be, we still buy a lot of the chemicals and other stuff from China. But the point is that India does not have too many options now. India may not be able to cut off China completely, but I think India needs to take some very strong, hard economic measures Like I said, India needs to bite the bullet and go through these hard times because the economic impact is going to be significant, but the national security and territorial integrity are far more important for India. China can cut off India pretty quickly, for instance, on the supply chains. And I think this has happened in the case of Chinese behavior towards Japan, towards Australia itself, and the manner in which China uses economic coercion as a tool in its foreign policy approach. So India has to be mindful of such tactics used by China, and therefore India has to think about ways to diversify and cut off China, at least in gradual terms. China is not going to be affected as significantly because India mainly exports primary commodities, and China can easily sort of find alternatives to India, and so that's not going to be a problem for India. But at the same time, for India to find alternative partners to do this, and I think there is already a debate about the global supply chain, and I think here is the importance of the Indo-Pacific powers, at least the big ones, need to come together, take some conscious decision to create alternative, viable, alternate supply chains. And I think we have to stop, at least reduce in a gradual fashion the dependency on China and more to alternate supply chains.
Will the changing Sino-India relationship now have a strong influence on India's relationships with Quad countries such as the US, Japan, Australia, and Quad Plus, which is New Zealand, South Korea, and Vietnam?
No, absolutely. I think this is the time has come. This time around, for instance, after the Galvin clash, the public anger against China is enormous. And not only that, I think one big shift that I see is the opinion among Indian elites that were not really seen in the past, even during conflicts such as the Doklam one in 2017. So there are serious calls on India to step up cooperation with other democracies and like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific. Quad and the Quad Plus obviously are gaining greater attention in the Indian debates. Quad has always been a security grouping, but I think it could also go a step further to engage in coordinated joint exercises, coordinated patrols in the Indo-Pacific waters. I think these are steps that India has resisted traditionally, but I think given the Chinese aggressive behavior, actions in the last few years and this year in particular, I think India is willing to take some bold steps. Also, debates within India are things like how to strengthen strategic ties with countries like Taiwan, an entity that China does not recognize. Similarly, there are calls for extending greater support to the Tibetan cause. So the Indian foreign policy and national security strategies are beginning to see changes. At least there are certain strategic fluctuations in the Indian foreign policy which I have not seen before, even during the Doklam crisis. And that was a big moment in the Indian national security debates.
What do you expect will be China's reaction, if any, to India's strengthening ties with countries such as the US, which China itself currently has aggravations?
Of course. China is not going to be happy at the fact that India is going to be strengthening its strategic ties with countries like the United States, the US allies. I think that's going to be it can get China to kind of be pretty angry about it. But the fact is that India has to look at its national interests first and foremost, and that calls for building stronger military strategic collaboration with countries like China. With the United States, of course. And in the meantime, I think it also has to build up its hard power, military power capabilities, but I think it's going to take some time. So in the meantime, India has to undertake, I would believe, a shrewd diplomacy, one that is based on pragmatism and national security considerations. And I believe today the US and India are on the same page when it comes to ensuring a stable, secure, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. China has to realize that it has not given India any choice in this regard, and therefore India is not, because India traditionally did not play the balance of power games. It never wanted to take sides between China on the one and others. But I think the recent aggressive behavior of China has forced India with not too many choices, but to go along with the countries like the US allies, Japan, Australia, France, and so on and so forth, and also countries like New Zealand, Vietnam, South Korea. Each of these neighbors also have faced the brunt of Chinese behavior, aggressive behavior in their own neighborhood. So this is going to be strengthening in the coming years.
Why do you think China is acting so aggressively. It's, for example, South China Sea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, India. What do you think their ulterior motive is?
No, it's very difficult to say as to what is driving the Chinese behavior today, because they have got they have gone against everybody in the South China Sea, East China Sea, against Japan, against countries far from the shores, in a sense, Canada, Sweden, everybody, they literally everywhere, and of course Australia has been bearing the brunt as well. It's very difficult to pinpoint and say what is driving. One could be that China is trying to do this as a way of covering up for the kind of missteps that China took in the post-COVID when the COVID pandemic broke out. Clearly the kind of backlash that China has faced in terms of lack of information or misinformation campaigns that it undertook, but also in the kind of post-COVID assistance that it was extending to other countries, where they sent faulty PPE kits and so on and so forth. So there has been quite a bit of a backlash back at home, and so this is an effort to cover up. But I remember reading an essay in The War on the Rocks written by a Chinese scholar trying to provide a Beijing perspective. And that says that one is, of course, the domestic angle and the effort to cover up the mistakes that did it during the initial stages of the COVID pandemic. But the second is that China has become an extremely paranoid nation. If a country is so paranoid, so insecure, there is very little that you can do to pacify, to kind of cajole, in a sense. So I'm not sure any step that India is going to be doing, or Australia that is going to do, or Japan, or any country for that matter, or any of the countries that share territories with China, in a sense, disputed territories with China, it's going to have a serious problem, because China is so insecure, and India has already kind of been dealing with one insecure nation on its west, and now we have an insecure and paranoid nation on our right side as well, on the east. So it doesn't leave India with a very, it's not an enviable position at all that India is located in. So it's going to be a hard time. It's going to be a critical moment where India will be forced to take some hard, pragmatic, national security really oriented decisions in the coming days.
It's interesting. China plays the long game very well. So unless this is all part of that long game, it just a lot of it doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, absolutely. China usually, and I think that sometimes we tend to make a sort of a error in our judgment, I believe, sometimes, because we assume that China is this very calculated player who's a monolith, and there's just single one voice that carries out things, perfectly. But I think China is not exactly that, and China also faces a lot of domestic pushback. And ever since Xi Jinping has come, and the manner in which he has accumulated power all around him, it's been amazing. And I think there is a strong pushback on that factor. And again, we don't look at that. We just think that Xi Jinping is all in all powerful. He's powerful, but I think there are also going to be limits. And because he has pushed certain limits, I think there is going to be a bigger pushback on his authority, in a sense. And I think all of this aggression that we see towards his neighbors and others is partly a result of that. It's not a secure nation, secure leadership that you're seeing out in China. It's an insecure, paranoid nation. Paranoia from every angle, from domestic and international international scenario, in a sense. So there is only that much you can do to pacify China.
And if the information that the world is getting, if only they would get reliable information, either you have the misinformation unit from China, or you have the Western media, which always now looks for clickbait. So information is hard to come by. If it's correct, could all be false or fake news, as a famous president once said.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you seriously have that. But I think it's also the time for all the like-minded countries to come together, undertake some coordinated policy decisions, because in the absence of that, you are going to flounder. And I think this is the time that you want a strong, decisive U.S. leadership, for instance. Without that, again, it's going to be a serious problem. Because in terms of if you look at China's economic and strategic power, the military power, there is no comparison to any of us together. Sort of, even if India, Japan, and Australia came together, we are still no match in terms of our capability, hard power capabilities to that of China. And therefore, I would think we need, and I think that's very, very clear that you need the US at the leadership role. You need the US to have a decisive leadership role to play in the Indo-Pacific if we have to be able to. But I think the US is going through its own turning process. You have a leadership that can be admired from certain angle, but there are serious, because for one, Trump has been able to confront China in a much more direct fashion than any of the recent presidents that you can say. But the manner in which he has gone, I think that's created a lot of unnecessary noises around his policies. So I think there could have been a better tactic on the U.S. side on the part of President Trump in pursuing the China policy in a much more clear fashion. But I think the agenda from the Trump presidency seemed to be very clear that time has come for the U.S. and all of us to address China front and square, in a sense. You can't ignore that China threat anymore. It has come knocking at our own doors, in a sense.
Maybe the Secret Service can confiscate all of the president's telephones so that he won't be using Twitter ever again. It's a terrible thing. I mean, it's just like this incessant child in the classroom. I got to keep talking. Stop! Just stop!
Absolutely.
Just do your job.
Absolutely, the tendency to react and the kind of Twitter that comes out of the White House is just not funny anymore.
On the other hand, though, we can't really find out what Joe Biden is talking about. He hasn't come out of the basement yet, so
exactly.
Who knows?
Absolutely. So we are. That's my worry, that at a time when we needed the most in terms of a very, very strong, very clear balance, a clear-headed U.S. leadership, we are not seeing that. The Trump may have got the China threat right, but I think the tactics used in terms of addressing that China threat has created more problems, in a sense, in some ways. So I think there are issues around that as well. So let's hope we are getting to some better times in terms of dealing with the China problem, because China problem is not going to go away. China will come to be a world a number one superpower, but it's going to take several decades, I believe, before it gets there. But the problem is that China believes that it is already there, and it wants to sit at the high table and dictate to the rest of the world how the world should be run. And I think that that haste in its Chinese behavior is part of the problem.
Raji, pleasure chatting. We could do this forever. I mean, there's so many things that we'd like to talk about, but we only have limited time, so we'll have to take this up later on, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I would look forward to another chance to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.